Hello and welcome to Dinis Guarda, Cities ABC Open Business Council YouTube podcast series. We are here once again to talk about the big themes of humanity, the big challenges and opportunities that we're facing in our moment in history, and looking at personalities and thought leaders and entrepreneurs that are changing the way we think about our society, and as well how we can actually improve the way we behave personally, professionally, and in society. In this series, we've been always highlighting the best in the world in what they're doing, but as well people that look at moonshots, that look at ways of inspiring other people. And I would say that people that don't give up, that actually create fantastic things in strategical level, but from the strategy to the practice. And that brings me for our guest of the day, which I'm very excited to onboard. So we are featuring today Chris West, that is the founder of Verbal Identity and the best-selling author. And before I open the door to let him speak, because that's the idea, just a bit of an introduction about him. So Chris is a unique combination of insightful, in one hand, strategical thinking, and at the same time, a writer and an author. We're going to be talking about his new book, Strong Language, the fastest, smartest, cheapest marketing tool you're not using. And I love it because it's something as a CEO and as an author and as well as a YouTuber and a podcaster, I really understand the importance of the verbal identity. But as well, so from the achievements of Chris, he's been working in strategical brand consulting, specializing in the power of language. And some of his clients include some of the biggest corporations in the planet, with the likes of Alphabet, Moonshot Factory, actually it's quite an interesting one, LVMH, so Louis Vuitton Group, which is of course doesn't need presentation, but as well organizations and brands like Vauxhall, John Lewis, and a lot of startups from fintech, data science, and beauty. And about some of the work has been working as well. We have things like working with global clients, but as well, especially in the past, he work across platforms like The Guardian, Adidas, British Airways, and as well some political parties. And I'm looking forward to this as well. It was as a bestseller, and some of the two books to date is Strong Language, which we're going to be talking today, but as well all the things that he talk and as he's been writing. So Chris, welcome to our series. I'm quite excited to have you here.
Thank you, Dinis. I'm excited to be here as well. And thank you for that very flattering introduction.
Well, it's all, I think it's very clear. It's not actually any flattering because you've been doing this work is quite impressive. So Chris, as someone that has been an expert in strategy and an expert as well in language and the way we communicate, which is actually very difficult. I struggle every day as CEO in particular, actually as a father and a husband. But one of the challenges is how we look at this in our lives and in our background. So my first question, it always comes, if you see my YouTube podcast interviews, is always about the background. So a bit of your background and how do you achieve this? Of course, your bio is quite comprehensive. I try to summarize, but I would like to see how do you end up being a verbal identity and best-selling author, but as well, how do you focus in these areas?
Well, that's a great question. And I think I was joking with the CEO of a bank that I was talking to a couple of weeks ago, and he said the same kind of thing to me, Chris, like, why are you doing this? How did you get here? And I had to admit to him, I think it's only on the last day of my career that I'll fully understand what my career was. Because right at the beginning, my education, my education background was all in sciences, and I loved science. You know, I loved, human physiology was my undergraduate degree, all about how the body works. Postgrad in computer science, really fortunate to be at Cambridge University amongst some super intelligent people. And in fact, the first couple of years of my working life were in the world of computers. And then I had this kind of realization that there was something else that I was really interested in. It was this creativity. So you could say the first half of my life around education was all very science-based. And towards the second half and the later part of my working career, it was all around creativity. And it's really only in the last, say, 5, 6, 7 years that I've been able to start weaving these two things together into a unique DNA strand. So we've really for me in my business, we talk about the magic and mechanics of language. So the mechanics are actually really identifiable. There's linguistics at work, there's psycholinguistics, helps us understand really what language is doing and how it's working. But there's always going to be something, I feel, which is never going to be explained. There's always some kind of magic. And Dinesh, I don't know if you've watched the Netflix series Get Back, how the Beatles recorded the Let It Be album. And a lot of people have been talking about it. It's 8 hours long. It's a fantastic long documentary, but there's a bit in the middle where you see them creating the tune, the track, Get Back. And it's wonderful to see them create. And they had 5, 6, 7, 8 different versions of what the lyrics would be and how the whole music bed would work. And you can see them creating, and there's something magical going on there. So as much as we want science in our world, and I'm really strongly say we need science in our world. There's a lot of people that say, oh, science is almost, no, I really think we strongly need and must listen to science. There's also some magic as well that can go on. And I think when you can weave those two together in business or in language, you're doing really well. So that's my career. That's how I got here. But I think it'll only be on the last day when I can look back and say, oh, so that was the thing. That's what I was meant to be doing all that time.
And what was the moment? Because I'm as a writer myself, I've been writing since I'm probably 11 or 12, at least on a consistent way. And one of the things is that the writers live in two worlds, the real world and the world of the words. So I would like to see it mostly as, because you've been writing for a lot of assets, and of course, not just writing, but thinking about strategies. And of course, with a background in science and some of the biggest universities in the world. So how did you look at this? Because of course, these topics that you're doing in your work, from strategy to all these things, are really impressive, but as well are very complex. And I think the point when you go to language is that language is, like say, there's a Portuguese poet that I love that is, you live in your language. And it's true, we live in the way we speak. And actually Buddha says as well that the way you think, normally you act. So I'm thinking normally we think with words, we think with language. So I would like to see, and probably when you is the moment that you start really realizing, I know that it's a lot of moments, but
yeah,
how did you start getting into this trajectory of your career as a strategical thinker on these areas and writer?
Well, I think the traces of it, the start of it was really very early on in my creative career. So as I say, I left the world of rationality, of pure rationality, in almost to an inhuman extent of pure rationality in the world of computers. And then I moved into advertising as a copywriter in the creative department of one of the, I still believe it was the best ad agency in the world at that time. It was a truly wonderful experience. And the setup of creatives in the ad agencies in those days would be, there would be one person on one side of the desk who was an art director, and the other person was the copywriter. Now, a lot of people I noticed, I kind of made a joke that they were copywriters only because they were sitting on the side of the desk, which had the dictionary on. You know, they weren't, it's not that they were calling themselves copywriters because they had a true deep love of language. They really loved ideas and they really loved creative ideas, as I did. But what I felt was different about me was I really loved how language worked. I could see that when you shape language, you shape people's thinking. So I was really a writer's writer. I was really a writer's writer. I really spent time crafting it, considering it, because I thought it was worth it. And other people, maybe they're right, said maybe it's not worth it. But for me, that was the start of it, understanding that, yeah, I could see what happened when I shaped language and I presented the work to someone. You could just see, you could almost see their mind changing as they reconsidered something. So for me, that was the start of it. And maybe 10 years ago was the real activating catalyst, if you like. So 10 years ago, every time I left a meeting, a client would grab me by the shoulder and say, hey, Chris, I wonder if you can help us. And I say, sure, yeah, what do you need? And they say, oh, we need 4,000 words to be written before breakfast tomorrow and every morning before breakfast. Because of social media, because of CRM, because of customer service expectations, because of the brochure, because of everything. And for me, I thought, well, I really understand how brands work and why brands are important. And we can come back to that, but also really understand how language works. So shouldn't there be more attention into the kind of strategy of language, how it's working in people's heads, what it's doing for businesses inside the building and outside? And it was a really undersupplied area, I think. So, you know, if you look at any kind of government department, if you look at any business, I think they've generally really sweated their visual identity. And I make a joke, it's normally between 120 and 130 slides of a PowerPoint deck, which precisely defines their visual identity, all the nuances of color, palette, photography style, everything else. And then normally around page 114, it says our verbal identity, and it's 4 adjectives on a page, which doesn't really help anyone. So lots of companies end up looking different, but sounding exactly the same. So it was that kind of realization that made me think, you know what? Why shouldn't business owners, founders, leaders have another lever to pull to shape how their business interacts with their colleagues and shape how their business interacts with the outside world? And for me, that was language, this hugely supremely powerful thing that we all have. That was it for me.
That's wonderful. And I would like urge everyone listening to us that this is a critical element, probably as we go to the angles of artificial intelligence in the next decade. We're going to automate most of the jobs in the world, but there are a lot of new jobs that will be created. And a lot of them would be about being cautious about this and telling machines what to do. Because I think there was a fantastic quote from Chris Anderson, and actually from Mark Anderson, sorry. And he said that there's only 2 kinds of jobs in the future. One is tell machines what to do. The other one is machines telling you what to do. So on this level, I want to be here. So you've been working with some of the biggest brands in the world. I mentioned some of them, from Alphabet to Louis Vuitton. And so for people listening to us, and we have a lot of C-level and a lot of entrepreneurs and as well wannabes and people. So let's look at this kind of definition of verbal identity. So how do you define the verbal identity? Because it's quite unique. There's normally brand and there's the identity, special digital identity, but verbal identity is quite original. And of course, there's a website for people listening to us. Please go to the website that Chris managed, one of his websites, and we're going to put here is verbalidentity.com. But I want to start with this, and then we go to your book.
Oh, sure. So if I may say one thing just for clarity before we go into it, which is that I've been delighted, honored really, to have done work for the LVMH group, although it wasn't the Louis Vuitton brand itself, just in case there's any doubt. So yes, it's a really good point you raised, because I think a lot of business leaders are in that same situation. They might be saying, I know our language isn't great. Could we do any better? I know that I would like us to be talked about more. Could we do any better? I get how we define our visual identity. I get how we define it, but can you do that with language? What is in language? And actually, it's a great place to start, because one of the exercises we do when we do a little workshop, introduction workshop with businesses, is that we'll show them 2 pieces of copy. And Dinesh, I'm not a car nut. I don't know if you love cars, but I'm not. But I always say, look, if a Mini came down the road and a Ferrari came down the road, I'd know which was a Mini and which was a Ferrari instantly. You know, maybe even from half a kilometer away, I'd be able to say which was which. And if one was starting its engine outside now, I'd know which was a Mini and which was a Ferrari. So, you know, visually, those brands are really well defined. Orally, you know, in our ears, the sound is really well defined. And then what we do is we show people a piece of copy on the left, a piece of copy on the right. Both pieces of copy are describing how their car takes a corner. One piece is by Mini, the other piece is by Ferrari, but they're completely anonymized. So there's none of the visual identity. There's no color palette, there's no font, there's no photography, nothing else. Most boring font I can find. And everyone, all the time, everyone, always instantly can say, that's Mini, that's Ferrari. And I say, so how come? How's that possible? And then people start telling me. They say, well, there's this, there's that. And so actually, people intuitively, although they don't have a construct in their mind for what verbal identity is, they know what verbal identity is. And when they start giving their answers very quickly divide into three categories. And that's part of our framework, if you like. Those three categories are, there's a 10,000 foot overarching narrative to every good piece of writing. There's, if you come down a level at 1,000 feet, there's really a strong personality that comes across. You get a feeling of the kind of people that would be behind the brand. And then down at ground level, there are the nuts and bolts. There are the words and phrases a brand will use, won't use, even things like sentence length, Dinesh. You know, the Ferrari's sentence length in the copy we show is as technically engineered and complicated as one of their cars. You know, it's 50 words, 4 different subclauses. A Mini is simple and fun to read. So when we talk to business leaders about verbal identity, it's very quickly they can see, because it's intuitive for them. Yeah, I understand how language works now if there's this really simple framework. So that's really how people get into it.
So I think on this level, so let's go from a bit the theory to the practice, because I think one of the things that it's really important for me as a leader, as an author and writer is, and that's not personal, because in the end it starts with our personal leadership and the way we use the language. So this verbal identity, let's say from people listening to us right now, if you could, and I'm sure I would suggest everyone to buy the books and read it, but I think firstly, as a summary, so you mentioned the example of like a car and the identity that you create, but how you transform this into verbal? Because of course, right now, I would say that we are more distracted than ever because our narratives are very broken. Let's say until the 20th century, we'd have the religion narrative, with the political narrative, the tribal narrative. Now we have more digital tribes, or sometimes even a lot of the things that are created artificial through a lot of things we get on the internet that sometimes we think are real, and everyone has an opinion. And that moment right now, everyone definitely has an opinion because social media just extrapolates that. But identity is about as well having a narrative and having some kind of sense of correlation with your history and about something. So could you elaborate a bit more, at least top level, of course, and I would suggest people to read the book.
Well, it's interesting. So imagine if you posed that question to someone who was a great data analyst. And I've got a friend, Nina. She's the most brilliantly talented data analyst. She can look at a hugely complicated spreadsheet and she can just go, right, I can see the story here. I can see what's going on. Yeah. You know, in the same way that some people understand numbers, I think we understand language. We understand it. We have an ear for it. But in practice, you know, what's going on? Well, defining that 10,000 foot narrative is the critical first step. Because, you know, when we worked with Vauxhall Cars here in the UK, the CMO, the Chief Marketing Officer, said he thinks he had around about 200 external writers every day writing for his brand. So each of those people during the day is making this decision. Do I write about this? Do I write about that? If we're writing about this in our sector, because everyone has to write about it, should I just write the same as everyone else? So defining at 10,000 feet your narrative, we say it's really important to define the world that you want to create. Dinesh, you know the world you want to create. You want to bring this understanding of tech, blockchain finance. You want to bring that to everyone. You know, that's your view. I can't speak for you really, but I'm saying, you know, I can imagine that your view of the world is everyone should be excited about this, but everyone should be aware of the hazards, but everyone should certainly be educated and have a solid opinion. So that's your view of the world. So a brand will often have a similar view of the world. We want to bring this to the world. Once you've defined that, if that's true, what things are you going to stand for? And what things are you going to stand against? So I'm guessing for you, Dinesh, again, excuse me, I mean, I might be way out of line, but you know, some of the things you're going to stand for are open access to the information, balanced opinions, deep dives, insights, the latest news, things like that. Some of the things you're going to stand against are baseless opinions, people just doing it to attract attention to themselves, hype, things like that, or you know, cold inhumanity of tech. Once any brand has defined the world it believes in, then it's quite the world it's trying to create. then I think it can quite quickly say, so these are the things we must stand for, and these are the things we're going to stand against. Now that's great for all your 200 external writers, because suddenly they know we're going to talk about this. And if we have to talk about the same as everyone else in this sector, this is the angle we're going to take on it. So once you've defined that, then you can come down to 1,000-foot level, and you can be sensitive to the brand at this point, or you can be sensitive to the business. So if you're a startup, sensitive to what's in your heart. Are you confrontational as a brand? Are you gently coaxing and embracing as a brand? Are you fun? Are you very serious? Are you very technical? Those are the things, almost like a bit of personality analysis that will come out, and they shape the way that you write whatever it is you've decided to write at 10,000 feet. And at ground level, there are some things that people amazingly will just say straight away. So we worked with the CEO of a British brand, and he's a British clothing brand, and he said, Chris, we don't write store in our copy because store is an American word. We use the word shop because we're a British brand, and that's how we express where people can buy our clothing. So there's all these little cues, all these little hints in people's personality or in a brand's personality. They're all there. And if you can listen to them and spot them and question things in the right way, then often what you find is that the leader of the business or the brand owner or whoever's responsible for this tone of voice is very good at starting to put it together, and we just give them the framework and we just help them with a few tips and tricks along the way.
Wonderful. And I think these things are really critical for everyone listening to us, and I think it's going to be increasingly more critical. So let's go to your book right now. So like I mentioned, your book, the last one, you had the first book, How Words Work, that was released in 2019. And now we just launched one that is Strong Language, the fastest, smartest, cheapest marketing tool you're not using. And I think, as you say in some of your pages, and I think here, of course, is discover the 3 levels that every brand voice operates on, and learn step by step how to create practical tone of voice guidelines, and look at how to create this change you want. So can you highlight, first of all, about, like, of course, top level summary, and the idea is for people to read it because I think it's a must read, but as well, what would be like the summary or your pitch for the book, because I think that's what we're talking here as well.
Yeah, my pitch for the book is really straightforward. I think we're in a world where most people would say there are more channels than ever before. So we have to know what to say in each of those channels. Not only that, there are more challenges than ever before. So whatever size business you are, you can be pretty sure there's a new business that's just started in your sector, which is going to be aggressive. It's going to use language because they don't have money to outspend you, so they're going to outthink you, so they're going to use language. So there's more channels, more challenges. We're living in a society where I think consumers quite rightly are saying to brands and businesses, what's your view of this issue? And recently, even iOS 14 has really scuppered a lot of people's plans for acquiring new customers. So we're in this kind of environment where language has never been more important than before. We say that language is working everywhere all the time. And we're responsible, all of us in a business, for language with a greater velocity than ever before. So it's kind of crazy that we don't have a consistent language, that we can't look across at someone starting our company and we're going to train them in our HR policies. We're going to train them in our employee values. We're going to train them in various other things. And then we're going to give them one of these, a keyboard, and then we're not going to train them in how to use the voice of the brand, whether that's internally or externally. So my point of view is anyone in your business with a keyboard is writing for your business and can be adding value to your business. And they definitely need your help defining the business and the brand voice, because we're living in this world where there are more channels, more challenges, greater demand, language is working everywhere all the time. That's my pitch.
No, very good, and I think this is a very keeping to the point. So I think one of the things that that you mentioned in the book is about. So you mentioned the 3 levels, but as well is the process and how to get this process right. So one of the things I've been struggling with my teams and as well with the work I've been doing is the process. Actually, all the process make a difference. If you don't have a process, you end up actually failing. You fail on the branding, you fail on the goals, and setting up a process is probably the most important thing. So for people listening to us that are looking at this, and I'm sure that it will be reading the book, is so what is the, from your experience, of course, dealing with some of the biggest world brands, I'm sure that there's not the process is not the same for everyone. Everyone has their own process. Like you said, I have my process, but I'm always trying to improve it because it keeps moving. It's a moving target. And if everyone would have like a kind of a process that would be perfect, probably would be boring after some time. But in terms of this process, what would be the kind of guidelines that, especially when it comes to strong language and as well the brand voice, that you think are like the top level from your expertise and experience?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to be clear on what you're trying to achieve. And we live in a world now of metrics, and everything has to have an ROI, it feels. So that doesn't mean that it's impossible. But I think that one of the great ways to start this process is to say, what is it we want to change? Now, is it intuitive? Is it just that we in this company, or me as the leader of this business, I feel that, yeah, you know what, our brand voice isn't cutting through. The way we speak about our business just isn't good enough. That's okay. That's fine. The metric is, let's get the CEO feeling better, that the voice is differentiated, cutting through. Sometimes when you're walking into the CEO's office and you've got to sell in what you intuitively know, you've got to go in with some metrics. And in that case, we say there are some kind of hard and soft metrics. Hard metrics are, why don't you look at how many times you're rewriting something? Why don't you look at how long it's taking you from having an idea to getting the writing about it into the outside world? How do you feel? How would you feel? What impact would it have on your business if you were going to halve that, for example? Would it mean we could do twice as much, or we'd be more effective, or would be more agile as a business, or these other issues? We could get products out to the market faster if we weren't kind of being seen to hold things up. Some of the soft metrics are really around comparing you versus your competitors in your sector. Do you feel like they're getting share of voice with your consumers? Do you feel like they're cutting through disproportionately? And the last of the kind of softish metrics is, there's probably some values for your business. Either it's kind of ethical values or it's brand values. And just take maybe 20 pieces of copy that you've produced in different channels, and just score them, out of 5 for each of those values. How do you stack up? What would happen if you were able to push all those scores up to 4 or 5 out of 5? That might mean that you cut through better, you reduce your media spend. It might mean that you can recruit people faster. It might mean you can recruit the right people. It might mean you could reduce to 0 your recruitment budget, things like this. It might mean that your customer experience department isn't so overwhelmed because they're communicating really clearly and really winningly on their first communication. Might mean that your CEO's speech to investors is far more successful by any metric you choose, because there's a greater clarity and a greater unity of thought. So that's really where we normally start the process. Let's have a kind of understanding of what we want to change and how we're going to be able to be confident that it's changed. The second thing is, I think it's really important to know that creating the guidelines, doing this process, is 49% of the job. It feels like 100% of the job. It's 49% of the job. The bigger part, 51%, is getting everyone in the business to buy into and start using every day the language that you're creating, which will help differentiate the business. So with that in mind, one of the things we say is it's really important to go for buy-in right from the beginning. So being very clear on who should be involved. Sometimes people want to exclude their external agencies. For me, that's kind of understandable, but sometimes you want to say, guys, look, bring them in because they'll be executing the voice subsequently. So knowing who will be involved, knowing what extent they'll be involved, that's important. And then setting up the space so that you can do it. Go somewhere different. There's a lot of process in the book, you're quite right. Go somewhere different, find the time, put your phones outside the room, be guided, look at what competitors are doing, but then use I mean, personally, of course, I'm biased, but use the framework in the book.
Yeah, and the framework is really important. I believe more and more in frameworks, because it's one of the things I've been finding out is without framework, we cannot really move forward. So in terms of, and I know that we're conscious of time, but probably will be the first one, because I want probably to do probably a live with you and other people about this. But so in your website, you have a lot of ideas in the book as well about the process and how you discuss and you've been improving the different process in terms of B2B and B2C clients and with global business and startups. And as well, like the book mentioned, is faster, smarter, and cheaper when you have the brand very clear, which I completely agree. 90% of my work and achievement is about the way I build my brand. So brand and the voice and identity is critical. So one of the things I want to come back here is the devil is always on details. Okay.
Yeah.
So so when you look at coming back to probably the process and as well some of these methodologies. So one of the things you have, and you have a fantastic infographic, is that there's 5 steps that you have, and one of them is everyone on board, then is design for ROI, then is one voice, and then is make it better and make it stick.
Yeah.
So one of the challenges I've been finding is, I would say that the most difficult is probably the one, okay? Because even when you repeat things, to get everyone on board is not an easy task, especially if you are in a startup or even if you are in family.
Yeah.
Everyone seems to have an opinion, and sometimes it is not easy because you need to deal with emotions, you need to deal with language. And for instance, if you have people from different cultures, you need to deal with the culture and personalities and a lot of different things. But like you said, and you have here, is that you are focused on common goals and concerns. And as well, you map the project in order to make sure that everyone is full aligned on what the project or focus is. So let's start with the point 1, because I think everyone on board is a key element. And I think you cannot do anything without getting everyone on board. So from your, let's say of course, you don't need to mention any names, but from like one very difficult case study that you have, what would be like some kind of successful experience that you have that you want to share with us?
Oh, that's a really good question. So we're lucky, I think. We don't have many examples in our past of really tricky clients. I think the reason for that is it's a certain kind of client that wants to reach out to us that is already conscious about their verbal identity. Because if they're the kind of client that understands already that they shouldn't go the same route as everyone else, that they need to try to find some advantage. If they're that kind of client, there's no point hiring us just to be tricky with us, if you like. You know, they're coming to us and they're saying, look, we almost need an unfair advantage in our market. And I agree with you, language is a kind of faster, smarter, cheaper way of getting that. So, you know, let's work together. So I think we're very lucky that we haven't had any tricky situations. How do you get everyone on board? I mean, I think, you know, we're humans, right, Dinesh? There's no answer from one person to another. It's time and it's listening skills, it's empathy. You know, some of the people at the beginning who we thought might be the most difficult, actually they come to turn out to be the biggest supporters of the work, simply because the reason they've seemed to be difficult in the past is because they're struggling. You know, they really want some help. No one's offering them this help. They're trying to achieve their objectives and they're struggling. And actually, when you sit down and you say, so look, how would writing help you achieve these objectives you just told me about? Then they say, well, you know, I feel like if I could write more clearly, if I could write these medium length reports in a way which is, you know, in our voice, or if I could get more success with my proposals out to my clients, I could get a bigger win rate, then I think, you know, then you say, well, how will the writing help? Well, you know, I guess I could write clearer, faster, I could be more like that person. That's great. There's something in it for them. There's something they really want to do. And because language is working everywhere all the time, then I think that language can help everyone with their objectives in a business. And so actually most people are like, this is great. I feel like I've been given another tool.
No, I completely, and I think this is really something that for me, it's really important, because the challenge right now on these things is when you don't fix this, you really get a mess. And I think this is actually very important. Like you said, people are struggling, especially right now in COVID, because people are working from home. For some companies are trying to make sure that people are really working. And in the end of the day, if you don't trust, if you don't create this everyone on board, it's a big challenge. And another thing, probably is more personal question that I have for you. One of the challenges I find is really, I'm working with very gifted talent. I'm very proud of my team and all the people. But I think one challenge I have is the personal development part. Because sometimes you get people on board, but not everyone can cope with the rationality and the multitasking that the modern world pushes us all. And people get drawn sometimes on the details, and they cannot cope with the stress that comes out of this, because there's so much distractions, so much different things. And it comes to probably my question, to go more direct, and my questions are always very big, so I'll try to make it as simple as possible. But it's mostly is the one end is how we can actually make people productive through the process and through the brand identity, but at the same time keeping people not to be robots. Because a big challenge I have is that a lot of very gifted people and talented people are kind of educated to be robots, and we have kind of two extremes. One is the robots, the other one is the ones that question everything without thinking, which is the other opposite. But in my case, probably I have more challenge with the robots, not in the bad ways. I think it's great people, but people, they cannot develop their brand, and they want to be told what to do. They want to go in the flow. And of course, that is not the way you build a company, because if everyone goes in the flow, yeah, it might work for some non-ambitious company. But if you are an ambitious company, this is key. And as well with the digital path, because if you're not building your brand in the digital path, you won't have success. So I would like to see your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think it is a really big question. And I think it speaks to the responsibilities of all of us, not just leaders of businesses, but colleagues of our teams, us as colleagues of people in the business. And I think that we should celebrate the people that want to be highly productive, and maybe understand their motivations. I think probably the biggest thing that's missing in working life at the moment is empathy. How can you understand what this person needs, what they're feeling, what they want? Why did they come into work today? What is it they're trying to achieve? And the old top-down way of controlling people, telling them what they're going to do, I think doesn't work anymore. So I think, one thing would be amazing would be to increase the empathy level of everyone in a business. I think the other thing is encouraging people to have a greater input into their own targets and objectives is probably a really successful way forward. Because I think then those people feel like they own the process. If they own the goals and they own the process and they want to own the future, they're much more committed. And I think that that's not going to be universal. There's going to be some people that doesn't work for. But I think in general, that's the way. Increase the empathy, try and kindle enthusiasm in people, and try and help them develop a sense of agency of what they want to achieve. And then all you have to do really is keep supporting them. And that's easier and more satisfying, I think, than pushing them. So, I think there are probably many better people than me to answer that question. For me personally, I hope it would be empathy and kindling their wishes and then supporting them.
I think, well, this is a great way of wrapping up. I have other things, but I think for today, I want to keep it this way. So I want to thank you. I think the empathy is key. And I think the empathy with brand voice, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
With verbal identity, like you said. So, well, Chris, thank you so much. So probably as a last such could you tell us where people can find your book? Of course, you'll put all of this in written, but coming from you is always better. And as well, where can find it, because you have fantastic tools for people listening to us, but coming from the mouth of the person is always better.
Thank you. Thanks, Dinesh. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Yes, the book, I'll lean across and grab it. There's the book, Strong Language. Guess what? It's on the major book sites, such as Amazon, such as Barnes and Noble. I think you can order it from most independent bookshops as well if you go in, if you'd rather your money went that way. I spend a lot of time, probably too much time, on LinkedIn. So sharing thoughts about what we're seeing in language tips, little exercises sometimes about what people can do, giving pieces of advice. Always very happy to answer questions. So if anyone wants to find me, Chris West, Verbal Identity on LinkedIn, I'd be very happy to see them there. Or of course, our website, www.verbalidentity.com. That gives a bit more detail about the company's background.
Yeah, I urge everyone listening to us to look at this. We put as well links to everything that Chris mentioned, so people listening to us will find both here on the YouTube channel the links, and as well there will be other promotion on the podcast syndication, because this says video and podcast, so we'll put all these bios and information. Chris, I want so much to thank you. I think this is very inspiring, and as well I've been reading the book, and as well your website, and as well some of your material on LinkedIn, like you mentioned, that is very compelling. But I think really for people listening to us is think about your verbal identity and take this serious, and because we all need it more than ever. Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you, Dinesh. Thanks, everyone.